just so we're all clear, coma simply means somebody who's unconscious and can wake up. Prognosis unknown. Many of you are in that state now. Technically, a boxer who's knocked out, maybe even when someone's asleep, might be viewed as in a coma. So it isn't that surprising that people wake up from comas. Permanent vegetative state means the cortex of the brain is not working, the cerebellum and the thermostat parts of the brain are still working. And that was Terry Schiavo and others. Probably about 8,000 people in that state in the United States. And then brain death, which was the bioethics sort of debating point, means absolutely no brain activity, irreversibly lost forever. No organized brain function. You might get a cell firing off, but nothing functional happening. I sometimes make this analogy. The comatose are people who are TV set and there's a picture but it's rolling. Permanent vegetative state is all snow and brain death is the set unplugged. So to get to brain death consensus, you had to find some way to measure, was the person on these machines, was their brain not working at all? And that's where the battle broke out too. What are the tests? What do you do? How do you measure? Do you test somebody's brain for activity twice, once, 3 times? Do you perform different clinical examinations, see what they respond to in terms of stimuli? Are their pupils all dilated? In any event, we did come up with agreement about brain death, and that opened the door to doing organ donation from the dead. If you can't be an organ donor of solid organs unless you're on life support. So that's why it's so difficult to get organs in the United States or any country. Happily, there are not that many people who die solely from head injuries on life support. It's not just being dead, it's being dead on machines. And that's a pretty rare circumstance, even rarer for children. So it's difficult to get cadaver donors. So what we've seen in the past 50 years since Joe Murray was transplanting between identical twins is a shift from only living people can donate, the notion that you can get organs from dead persons, the notion that you can move the organs so that you don't have to bring the donor and the recipient to the same place right away. You could get an organ in Philadelphia and fly it to Pittsburgh. And you can transplant organs between different people who might not be directly genetically related if you use the right drugs. Some people requiring not as much medicine as others to make this work, but you can make it go. So that pretty much is this world we've been in until recently. Some other things that have been happening in transplant. Success rates have been going up. When I first got interested in transplantation at Columbia Medical School back in late 70s, if you kept 20% of your heart transplantations alive for 5 years, you were a pretty good program. That was a pretty good rate. Today, if you don't keep at least 50 to 60% of your heart transplant recipients alive for 5 years, you're not much of a program. Most people would expect that minimally. So tremendous advances without going into the details, in the outcomes. Transplant works. Another fact that has shifted, we have a lot more people with more serious diseases who were considering transplanting today than you would have 20, 30 years ago. Today you might transplant someone with diabetes. Today you might transplant someone with hepatitis. Today you might even think about transplanting someone with HIV, who's HIV positive, because the medicines will prolong their lives and you can manage the immunosuppression so that you don't kill them even though they have that virus. Today you might consider transplanting someone who's a newborn. Today you might consider transplanting someone who's as old as 70. So all of these expansions in making the procedure work have created a big problem. And the problem pretty simply is this: there aren't enough organs. There are more people who want them because they work. Back in 1970, it was a kind of flip a coin as to whether it was a good idea to get a transplant. Might kill you before it would help you. Today, transplants work pretty well. Even with the Philadelphia Inquirer story about the little girl, they generally work very well. A lot of people live very productive, useful, happy lives with a transplant. Transplants can be given to many more people than they could 40, 50 years ago. Genetically identical people, twins, now anybody in a certain sense might be able to be transplanted. And we have situations now where we have many more people, I forgot to mention this, who can do transplants. So transplant teams, transplant programs have grown and proliferated. There are probably double the number today than there were back in 1979 when I got interested in all this. More transplant programs, more people who could get transplanted, better success rates, not more people who are brain dead. In fact, weirdly, we've done some things that have hurt organ donation. If you pass seatbelt laws, not good. If you pass laws against drunk driving, bad. If you hold parents and bartenders responsible for serving people who are going to get in vehicles and cause accidents, not good. Many of the public health measures that we have instituted have reduced or capped people who might be organ donors because we've cut down on motor vehicle rates. A bad fact is that Pennsylvania recently pulled back its motorcycle helmet law, which is in the field, if you hang around the hospital, we refer to those as donor cycles. If you're not wearing a helmet, it's not a good thing. And some states have turned those laws back, but most states had motorcycle helmet laws, and they too cut the donor rate. So we've had a flat supply of organs and tremendous increase in demand. So that's the moral dilemma we face, and it makes us ask the question about whether or not we're going to go other places to try and find organs. Remember now I told you about that framework, voluntary, altruistic, informed donation. That's what we ask living people to do who want to donate organs. And indeed, that's what we ask you to do if you want to be an organ donor after your death. You fill out the card. And if you don't fill out the card and your family is approached about this possibility, they're not paid. We don't take organs from anybody. We ask them to donate or give them or make an altruistic act and decide to donate organs. So we still have the same moral framework. What's going on now is people are raising the question, should we change the framework? Do we have a framework that's not getting us as many organs as we should? So up there you'll see a man named Robert Smitty, who was a guy out in Colorado. No, excuse me, Robert Hickey was out in Colorado. Robert Smitty was in Tennessee. And using the wondrous new technology of the internet, Mr. Hickey put an ad up on the internet and said, I need a kidney. And Mr. Smitty contacted Mr. Hickey and said, I will come from Tennessee and give you my kidney. By the way, there was a story in the paper yesterday that I had some comments about. A woman put up on eBay a request for an organ for her child. So this still goes on, the practice is still there. There are sites you can Google to that involve people trying to find organ donors. The hospital in Colorado didn't know what to do with Mr. Smitty. Lucky for me, they called me up and said, what do we do? This guy's here and he says he wants to give a kidney. So I said, well, one thing you might want to do is do a psychological evaluation of Mr. Smitty. Do you think he's competent?